And what we've seen through, as you've seen through the financial results through 2020, again in 2021, some, even further records beaten. And 22, there'll be a good set of results again, I'm sure, when we start to see those flow through. But we've got, facilities-wise, funding-wise, the businesses have never been healthier in many cases on that front. There's a lot of cash, there's a lot of underutilisation or indeed non-utilisation of facilities and funds. But again, looking forward, those businesses need to be careful not to, bank those funds and to make sure that they've got facilities ready to make them future-proofed as to what's still to come. And that's a balance between, preserving cash, preserving those facilities or headroom in those facilities with investing. And that's the difficulty at the minute as to, is now a great time to invest, which we've seen a lot of groups doing over the last few months, certainly, but also looking ahead as to that balance between investing and preserving.
Welcome to the latest edition of the AM News Show podcast. In this edition, we'll be joined by James Brearley, former Chief Executive of Inchcape, Alison Ashley, who's Head of Motor Retail at RSM, and Darren Bradford, who's recently been appointed Managing Director of RJTK Automotive. Please do remember that you can subscribe to the podcast to ensure that you get updates of each episode, and there should be something down the bottom of your screen to make that happen. So, welcome. Thank you for joining us, James, Alison, Darren. Great to get you all into the studio. It's early in the new year, and a new year where we all, I guess, are left guessing what it might bring. So I guess, part of this is we wanted to reflect on the year ahead. A couple of you have had job changes, scenario changes that we can discuss as well. But I guess initially I'll come to you, Alison, because you're sort of called upon to consult for the sector, and I'm hoping have a few ideas of the major challenges that retailers are expecting to face this year. I mean, what are people coming to you with at the moment? What are the main concerns going into 2023?
The main concerns, there are a lot of concerns.
There are a lot of concerns.
And I think that worked its way through, I think everyone looking through second half of last year, we're starting to be a bit more pessimistic for obvious reasons. I don't think it was quite as bad as people expected probably the last quarter to be, but it's certainly got a lot tougher, and things are slowing down. I think we've got a lag versus certain other sectors. We've got a good pipeline of orders, we've got resilient businesses that have been created and adapted and streamlined through COVID and lockdowns. But yeah, it's still a positive end to 22, but you're right, there are going to be even more challenges looking ahead for 23.
Absolutely. I remember coming to you, Darren, and doing that dealer face-to-face. Well, I didn't come to you because we did it virtually, didn't we?
That's right.
It was during
Online,
COVID. Yeah. And at the time you were talking about the need to expand the used car side of the business. How have you managed to do that, given all the constraints, and how's that looking going into the new year with supplies still constrained?
Well, we've moved on a lot since then. We had the used car crest, the wave that hit us, the residual values shot up, supply was in demand, but as we know, value of used vehicles went up in line with that. We're now back to reality, so it's about changing the mindset of the management team to make sure that we are back to normal times. We do need to concentrate on the detail, the stock turn, the detail in the advertising of the vehicle, so that we get that stock turn and make sure that we're buying vehicles correctly. So we're holding normal margins now. We're back to the normal world in the used car side of the business. So it's just about making sure that we do the basics. We just drive them basics every single day.
Have the order banks proved that sort of safety blanket that you were looking for, or is that looking a little bit more vulnerable, as the cost of living crisis starts to impact on consumers?
We haven't seen that as yet. We've not seen our order take drop off on new cars. It's still consistently coming through the door, and the team's doing a really good job at taking the customers out of the market and keeping in touch with them on a regular basis with updates on their new vehicle. Obviously, we're in the hands of the manufacturers with regards to delivery dates, but so far, so good.
Absolutely.
I think in the case of a lot of manufacturers, they still don't really have sight of significant kind of supply levels improving for some time yet. So it's the situation seems to be changing a bit for motor retailers, but I guess there's some more of the same to be expected. One thing that I wonder is obviously a lot of retail groups had a really good profitable 2020 21. If the worst does happen, we do kind of go into a real kind of economic downturn over the next year or two. Have dealers got that kind of war chest ready to kind of ride out the storm, do you think?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because, we're in a cost of living crisis, and I've been well travelled over the last few months, and I have to say, out there on the streets, in the shops, the supermarkets, the restaurants, and everywhere else, other industries, I've got family that own businesses and run businesses, they're not seeing it. They're not seeing this downturn. So perhaps I'm being over-optimistic here. I don't see this as being a problem. I don't think it's going to dig too deep. I think it will wash out by the end of this year. And a lot of it is, unfortunately, pushed through by the media as slightly scare tactics to make the general public change direction. I think the biggest issue we're facing at the minute is the interest rates, because we're seeing consumer finance starting to toughen up. It's becoming more competitive again. Again, like the old days, we just need to go back to basics.
I think the certainly some of the activity the Bank of England seems to be doing is not designed to force the recession, but it's expecting a shallow, quite kind of prolonged recession, and the messages from the bank are that kind of they want consumer spending to rein in a little bit. Do you see that coming through? Are clients worried about that, Alison?
Of course, yeah, everyone's worried. Going back to your original question, though, of resilience and strength of balance sheets and facilities and funding, through COVID, cash was king, as it always is, and preservation of cash was critical to those businesses through that time and uncertainty, as it still is now. And what we've seen through, as you've seen through the financial results through 2020, again in 2021, some, even further records beaten. And 22, there'll be a good set of results again, I'm sure, when we start to see those flow through. But we've got, facilities-wise, funding-wise, the businesses have never been healthier in many cases on that front. There's a lot of cash, there's a lot of underutilisation or indeed non-utilisation of facilities and funds. But again, looking forward, those businesses need to be careful not to, bank those funds and to make sure that they've got facilities ready to make them future-proofed as to what's still to come. And that's a balance between, preserving cash, preserving those facilities or headroom in those facilities with investing. And that's the difficulty at the minute as to, is now a great time to invest, which we've seen a lot of groups doing over the last few months, certainly, but also looking ahead as to that balance between investing and preserving that headroom. So that will be critical.
And often in a downturn, you see some of the groups coming out that are looking to invest further and looking to take those opportunities to expand further, while others might be retrenching slightly, I suppose.
What's
James,
it been like for you, James? Yeah, looking in from the outside, taking a bit of an opportunity since leaving Inchcape to view the sector from a slightly different angle.
Actually, to be fair, Tom, it's been really interesting. Actually, I've done quite a bit of work for various companies. I didn't leave Inchcape until the end of 21, so of course with restrictions, I'm literally a free agent, sort of as of now. But I could do some work for people that weren't obviously directly in competition. So I've sort of been on the edge of and watching what's going on. But to echo what's already been said, if you look at the short term, right? I mean, the retail business is in rude health, and it's generated, as Alison said, it doesn't matter you're a large or independent operator or you're a single independent or whether you're a large group. Reality is people have generated cash and they've been able to put that cash away. And of course, some of that has found its way into, with the larger groups investing in acquisitions. So I don't think there's an issue with cash, but I think if you step right out into the sort of macroeconomics of the industry we're in, I think it's interesting, really interesting times. And I say that because there's no single answer as to how the groups will fare, because they're all in slightly different shape, right? In terms of the way they make their money. Some of the groups are quite heavily dependent on new cars, are absolutely having a birthday today. Others are, have a sort of 25, 50 ratio split of new car, used car, and after-sales profit. So they're all in a slightly different place. But if you step right out and say, so what's going to happen? You can't get away from interest rates being the biggest driver of slowdown in new car sales, right? It has been for, I've been in this business for certainly well into the fourth decade. And every time you get a hike in interest rates, doesn't matter whether they've come from a base of virtually nothing, as they have for the last 10 years, or whether they were historically high and got higher, it's always going to slow the job down. And particularly today, when the vast majority of people take a car on a PCP with a relatively low deposit. You come back to change your car next time round, and the payment's doubled. It's going to dampen demand. So that's going to happen. There's no question. It's just a question of when. And the point you were making earlier on about car supply, again, all the manufacturers have been in a slightly different place depending on their scale and part supply. So it'll slow down, and we might. With some, we might flip into an oversupply situation earlier than others. But, sometime in the next 12, 18 months, it's got to slow down the new cars.
Do you think some of the actions that the dealer groups took in 2020 as COVID hit, or following the kind of end of the first major lockdown, to reshape the business, kind of look for those efficiencies then, do you think they've put them in a good place, ready if things do slow down?
No question. There's no question about that, because if you look at, not all of the groups, I'm sure, but a lot of the groups had put weight on, and we saw some significant reduction in costs, whether that was divestments or whether it was taking headcount out or whatever. We saw some really significant actions being taken in 2020, and of course, that's how everybody survived and prospered. Right now, there's some serious pressure on cost, isn't there? You just look at wage inflation. If you've got 4,500 people, then you've got a multi-million-pound pay increase bill to find this year, on top of the other pressures with energy and gas and all the rest of it. So if you hadn't got yourself sorted in 2020, I would think you'd be in quite a tough place today.
I guess that's something that you might be looking at, Darren. I guess now you've taken on that mantle of MD of the wider RJTK group, there are efficiencies to be found there, I suppose.
Absolutely. Economies of scale now can kick in. I've always worked closely with Robin as we've run the group almost independently across the past 10 years. But now we can really concentrate on looking at economies of scale. And that's something, as James said, people were doing in 2020, perhaps, is on my agenda here and now, especially with the utilities and increase in other costs are starting to pour in early this year.
Are they kind of main, I guess, kind of infrastructure? I'd kind of call them supply contracts like that. Are they something that you look at on a regular basis, or is it something that now it's come to the fore that sort of thing needs looking at?
No, we've always asked the companies, the partners we work with, to retender on a regular basis. So we're consistently refreshing the cost base of the business. However, sometimes it's not just about cost, as we know. It's about making sure that you use the right company that deliver value for money and a great service. You want those service levels as well as definitely the value in. Yeah, definitely. The value in. We can all go for the cheapest, but sometimes that's a false economy. It doesn't work.
Are there any other? I was going to say, Alison, are there any other actions that you perhaps
I think some at the minute are probably involuntary. That we've got a huge skills and labour shortage, and there will be vacancies across most dealerships at the minute. So that headcount cost is being artificially held lower than otherwise would be expected or budgeted at the minute. So there is some saving there, and whether that ends up being permanent as a result of some restructuring, I think there's still some way to go.
Absolutely. It's difficult, though, isn't it, for businesses that, as we say, have sort of trimmed down the costs quite considerably to then come into this period where costs are on the rise. I guess there's a lot of people looking around thinking there's not really many places left to cut. Is it the case that, as you say, headcount is low and the only way to get out of it, in a sense, is to start growing a little bit?
Yep. So, certain of the groups are obviously expanding and spreading that base cost across more dealerships and a larger group, but also looking at volumes rather than values. Volumes are massively reduced across these groups, and headcount hasn't necessarily tracked against that. So I know you're saying that they've been run lean, but I think there's probably some way to go still.
Really?
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd agree with that, to be fair. I mean, everybody's in a slightly different place, I guess. But I think if you took the Big 10 and certainly the Big 5, most people have worked out that the way to get your cost base down is to re-engineer processes and, have some form of centralisation or regionalisation. Tax cars using robots, artificial intelligence, and, re-engineer your processes. So I think there's a huge amount of that went on as a result of COVID and through that year. There's probably a lot of those lessons that could be learned, I think, by maybe the smaller, medium-sized groups who just haven't had the scale to be able to, to invest in that stuff thus far. But I mean, clearly, the name of the game here is productivity, isn't it?
I mean, interesting you mentioned that, James, because I was kind of back in my mind was thinking about kind of automation of some kind of processes within the dealership. Ultimately, I guess as a boss of a dealer group or former boss of a dealer group, you want your people to be in the places where they can deliver the most value to your business and to the customer. Do you see opportunities kind of going forward of more things to happen through software, through automation in the background, so that it allows them to focus on that high value activity?
No question, right? So be careful what I say here, but I don't think any of this is sensitive or difficult. I mean, I used to work for a huge global organisation. It would be nonsensical for a global organisation to have its accounts operation sat in every single market it's in, right? Because if you make sure that your data and your systems are robust, then actually processing accounts or processing invoices or paying people or whatever it happens to be, you can do that remotely and you don't need to be even in the country, right? So now I'm not suggesting for a minute or two if you're a small business in wherever, Leighton Buzzard, that you're going to suddenly offshore your accounts to India, or wherever it happens to be. But the message is still the same, isn't it? Anything that you can do with 3 people covering 10 sites rather than having 30 people has got to be helpful.
Absolutely. I think that is starting to happen at every level, isn't it? The people I've spoken to in the industry are really exploring and scrutinising new suppliers that can bring in that AI and that added layer of technology so that they can streamline. And in many cases, it is facilitating growth as opposed to cutting people out of the business. It gives you new options, doesn't it, to grow the business? Is that something that you're constantly hearing about now, Alison? That technology piece.
Technology through every sector, and motor's no exception, I guess. But technology and also digital. And again, I think COVID and lockdown, the positivities coming out of that was springboarding some of those strategies, and certainly digital strategies and omni-channel strategies for groups of all sizes. Whereas James said, it's probably the larger end of the market, and that's filtered through to everyone now as it should and needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much change happening in the sector, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about, James, really was, I know you had experience sort of prior to joining Inchcape as CEO in distribution, in a sense, and working with Inchcape on that side of their business. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you view the introduction of agency this year and how that's going? Because we've talked already about perhaps a transition into oversupply. I mean, that completely changes the mindset, doesn't it? And we've seen Stellantis back off a little bit. What's going on?
So how long you got? This is a subject that's been aired by many people. My personal opinion, I think there's a lot of hype around it. I spent an awful lot of time looking at the agency, of course, in my former role with a lot of other colleagues, and there are pros and cons. But if you think, What's the if you just break it all right down to a retailer mentality, right? It's really simple. If you've got a demand pull market, that means you've got new car margins that are high. So you can understand in a demand pull market that we've been in for the last 2 years and probably for the rest of this year or half of this year, you can imagine that a lot of people will say, well, actually, it's a margin cut, right? There's a flip of that. So as I said, I've been around a long time, and I've seen many years, and in some recent years, 18 and 19, for example, where you under pressure of stock sitting on your balance sheet or having to be paid for with cash at some point, under that pressure, you end up selling cars for free. So from a margin perspective, depending on whether you've got high demand or low demand versus supply, you could be actually better. You could be in a better off position if we get into oversupply. And of course, there's other features as well. I don't want to comment on specific manufacturers, but I've got to say, as a retailer, I find it quite hard to understand absolutely why manufacturers want to go down that route. I mean, agency is not new; it's been around for 100 years as a concept. It's not been used in the decades I've been in the business, because the risk they're exposing themselves to in terms of stock and what we used to call marketing support to move that stock, I think is absolutely enormous. But then, of course, if that risk has shifted, how can that be bad news for retailers, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's change. Nobody likes change. I'm not convinced that it's a bad thing. I think there's some positives to be gained out of it, depending on where you believe the market's going to go over the next 2 years.
This is it. I mean, a change in market dynamics, suddenly the whole mindset changes, and this is a long-term change of distribution model, So, I mean, even just coming into 23, do you think manufacturers that have previously said, oh, we're going to go ahead with this, and perhaps haven't got the ducks in a row yet, thinking twice already?
Well, I can't speak for the various manufacturers, but what I would say is I think you're very brave to go first. Especially, 2 years ago, arguably it would have been easier, wouldn't it? But, with hindsight, that's a wonderful science. But I wouldn't want to be the first at it, because, there's nothing compelling everybody else to follow you. And nobody really knows what consumers are going to do.
Yeah. I was with a manufacturer yesterday, which probably is considered a volume manufacturer, I would imagine nowadays, and it has no plans to go agency, but it says it's open-minded and it's happy to kind of sit back and watch as others do. But yeah, the CEO of the manufacturer expressed that he wasn't really convinced why other brands are going for it, and even if they're fully aware of what it completely entails for them, the complexities of it, the dealing with the customer satisfaction issues, that kind of thing. So yeah, he was, as I said, he was open-minded, but happy to just kind of wait and see.
And I guess, Darren, your dynamic has slightly shifted, because you've moved from having this Kia, Suzuki, Maxus operation to inheriting the Vauxhall side of the business as well. So you're not safe from that agency shift anymore, are you, potentially? What's your mindset as you look to... I mean, I guess you are looking to... Ideally, you'd look to bring the business together on the same terms, but that in itself is going to make things slightly different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one for me, this, because brands that say they're not going that route today, maybe in a few years, once it's been trialled, may go that route, and brands that are going that route may do a U-turn. We know what an agency concept is in the main, but how does it look for us as a business? The manufacturers not really come forward that have already put their hands up for agency model and laid it on the table. It's not been given to us. So actually, what does that look like? How does the margin structure work? What are we responsible for? What are they responsible for? It's all unknown at the minute. But I will say I'm looking at it, again, optimistically, that, assume it's handling fee, fixed margin. For me, that's a good thing. That's one less thing to control within our business. And we can do things to help ourselves. Just because we're an agent for that brand, it doesn't mean, I can only assume, it doesn't mean we can't go out there and chase that business still and put them through the agency model, with us being the preferred retailer. So there's lots of pros, I think, for it. But at the same time, my comfort blanket tells me that the brands that I work with or the partners I work with that have told me they're staying as they are, it does make me feel warm and hold that comfort blanket closer to me.
Dale Wyatt's worn his heart on his sleeve again on this issue, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Suzuki is safe with, and I suspect, Kia likewise. They don't look to be making any moves in that direction.
You've either got a very positive panel here or a very naive one.
Yeah. I was going to come to you, Alison. I'm glad you
sort of glass
in.
half full on this. I think, and maybe it's the sector and the people in it. I've always thought that whilst it's been fairly entertaining, in oversupply, high volume market, then the model as was or as is still at the minute with, targets, bonuses and the gamble around that ultimately in pre-reg was pretty unhealthy. For me, the manufacturers have got to reward the retailers. It may be some pain gain to start with in either direction, and I think that's a bit of a gamble, but probably again more for the manufacturers as to keeping the badges over the doors if they get it wrong. But I just, as we've shown through COVID, lockdown, resilience of this market and the people in it, they'll find opportunity. And as James said earlier, it's not all around new cars. We've got other revenue streams, we've got after sales, we've got used, and there'll always be opportunity in those for dealers.
What are the things that RASM have informed retailers they need to be looking at when they get these contracts through, if indeed many of them have landed? I imagine
that's probably one of the areas that I would say, my optimism is probably, if it's inevitable for certain of the manufacturers, which it is, then not just walking off the edge of a cliff and understanding. And again, going back to the manufacturer's not going to have all of the answers. The contract's not going to have all of the answers as to how you need to structure your business. And some of those things, you might choose differently based on the other revenue streams as well. So, there's lots of planning and preparation. And whilst a lot of dealer groups might say, well, I don't know the T's and C's yet, so I can't really plan, still sensitising forecasts, what's funding going to look like. And yes, a lot of that risk is taken away on the new stocks. But planning and preparing and being ready for possible scenarios is probably one area that I'm encouraging my clients to look at in more detail and earlier.
You've got to have a pretty open mind then, haven't you? I mean, anything's on the table early doors.
Yeah. I still think it's it can be modelled and adapted rather than just waiting.
Yeah. We've got a consideration with the AM100 at some point, haven't we, Tim?
We do, yeah. We will be looking at that closely because obviously the impact of agency will have quite an impact on turnover reporting. So, it's something that we mustn't leave too late, Tom.
Yeah. I feel like there's an onus of responsibility being shifted.
No, it will be a shared responsibility in our case, won't it?
Yeah, it does. It does change the whole look of the sector, doesn't it? And that measure of turnover as being the ultimate win.
It's interesting for a PLC because there's got to be some serious education, I think, for investors as to what the numbers will look like because they will, as you say, change dramatically from a turnover perspective.
Absolutely.
I do wonder though whether the last couple of years has made some franchise dealers thinking actually we're used car dealers now. The used car business has been so with margins kind of climbing and values climbing. Actually, it's become absolutely at the heart of the business. And while the supply constraints continue, I've spoken to some dealers who are now kind of used car first, and then the new cars, when they can get them. Not that they tell the manufacturer that, obviously, but I wonder whether there's been a bit of a mindset shift.
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, I'd say, it's hard to say, isn't it, across the whole sector, but, the guys that are, and ladies that have done really well in this business over the last 3 decades have always been used car operators, haven't they? Because, there's an argument that says if you're a really good used car operator, it's hard to see why you wouldn't be a really good new car dealer. I mean, if you're sitting there today with your entire focus on new cars as a retailer for a brand, then I should imagine you're probably quite worried about agency, and you probably need to sharpen your skills a little bit into the used car area.
A few people have obviously proved that used cars are are not as easy as it looks on initial inspection. I mean, what do we think to the the way the online used car retail sector has panned out? I mean, it's
you're going to mention Kazoo, aren't you?
I'm not going to.
No one was thinking that.
I'm not naming names. No, I mean, but that whole model looked ideal during the COVID period, and it looked like it was off to a flyer. I suspect to some people, but is it now emerging that the way the infrastructure that a retail group has is just hard to beat in the sector?
But it always was. So I'll be controversial because we I'm not going to name names here, but right, we all know what we're talking about. I mean, anybody who was daft enough to invest in a business that said, look, we've got technology, we're going to bring it to used cars and we'll beat everybody that's already in that sector, right? I mean, that's like chasing gold at the end of a rainbow, isn't it? I mean, reality is, if they'd have looked properly at the sector's been digitalising its offering and been transacting online actually for a long, long time. I mean, my former employer, with Pendragon, I mean, we were sitting powering up Virgin Cars website when they had a go of it. We were doing all the back office and service business for them. I'm going to say, I don't know, certainly before year 2000. So we've had quite a few years. Most people in this business have had quite a few years of using digital ways of marketing cars. Somebody popping in saying, actually, car retailers don't use digital media. I mean, they're insane, right? And used cars isn't that difficult. It's the same as any other retail, isn't it? You've got a finite margin. You're not going to convince a customer to sell your car much cheaper than it's advertised all over the internet ad. So there's only a finite margin you're going to make. So on that basis, you've got to get your costs below it. So, people coming out with these great promises to, look, I tell you what, we'll turn up at your house and we'll give you a personal service and a personal handover in your front room. I mean, how can you afford that? Well, it's impossible.
There is, of course, an online retail operation which has now a lot of the infrastructure and the foundations that a large group has. So, I mean, do you see that panning out a slightly different way? Is Cinch the bigger threat than Kazoo ever was?
Well, I mean, if you look at the parentage of that company, of course it was always a bigger threat than Kazoo ever was, but it's a bigger threat because that company really understands the sector it's in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simple answer.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting talking about the way investments come into the sector in huge amounts. Do you think that exposes the fact that perhaps externally there's a misunderstanding of what automotive retail is all about? I mean, there's a huge number of experts employed in the industry, but those looking to put money into it from the outside could perhaps be swayed by preconceptions.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, if you look at the valuation of any motor group in probably the last 20 years and actually today, let's be fair, these businesses look cheap, for the ones that are publicly traded.
Given the asset base, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, they look ridiculously cheap. So, yeah, of course there's a lack of understanding. But then having said that, is it helpful when externals come in and say they're going to revolutionise the industry, attract huge amounts of investment, and then lose it all? However you cut it, the sector gets tarred with that brush.
Yeah. How do you subscribe to this, Darren? I mean, early on we were talking to a lot of people who said all this noise, be it good or bad, has attracted attention to the fact that retailers do sell online, and it's done, in some senses it might have done the sector a bit of good. It's drawn awareness to that. Is that something that you've embraced or you've seen?
Well, being the forever optimist again, we were trading online before COVID. Transaction beginning to end with home delivery before COVID came along. So, again, I'm going to use the word disruptors. We keep getting told by manufacturers these are disruptors in the marketplace. I don't see them as a threat. I see them as an opportunity. It draws people online. And when people online, they start searching and clicking around. That's more opportunity for us as dealers to cash in on that. Our uptake on purchasing online is very minimal, very minimal. It's in single figures, definitely, in our retail mix. And half the time, the furthest we're getting customers is to reserve online, and then they're booking an appointment to come in to the showroom. So we're not seeing the uptake still. And I've got kids that are now driving vehicles and just passed the test. I think we call them millennials, don't we, or something like that. I ask them, yes, my market research, I say to them, if you see this car online and you see this car at a dealer 30 miles down the road, what would you do? And even they said, oh no, definitely wouldn't buy it online. I want to speak to someone on test drive. I want to ask information about what the vehicle does, what it's got on it, the specification. Perhaps that's me being old school. Again, perhaps a bit naive. I'm a people person. I believe people want to buy from people. And I think we're a long, long way off transacting a motor vehicle from beginning to end. I'm not saying certain brands out there haven't been successful at it to a certain degree, but I think we're not there yet.
Do you think that's hugely underestimated, that consumer relationship with the people they buy from? It seems inevitable that that's the case, given the numbers that most groups are seeing coming in from online, purely online sales.
Absolutely, it's definitely underestimated. Now, I think to go back to a point James said earlier about investment, I think the investment is led through the software. So they didn't see it as the automotive sector. It was, this is a piece of software. I think that's where it's drawn the investment, because let's be real, everything nowadays, the minute a software company emerges or is born from somewhere, it's got money thrown at it left, right and centre. I think overall we've become slightly ignorant as an industry to people's personal needs when dealing with customers, and we believe if we slap an EDM out there or we put something online or a pop-up, that's it, that's acceptable. And I don't think that is. I don't think that's a good way to grow a sustainable retail business. I think you need to be in touch personally with the people, and that's certainly something I'll be driving this year in my business from the shop floor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that you've gotten back to a little bit. Are you happy to talk about it, James? You've been a bit more nuts and bolts, hands-on in the industry, perhaps than you have been for years. And you told me outside you've been enjoying it. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, what you're referring to, I think. I mean, my lads have got a business that is a independent specialist in various brands, market brands, and I help them acquire it, and I've spent a bit of time working with them, and it's really interesting. Actually, you're absolutely right. Those businesses do well and thrive because actually they do a really great job for customers. So for certain, I mean, that said, going back to the point we made earlier on with technology, I mean, that's a small business that has a website that you can transact fully online with. You can certainly pay, place a deposit for a car, etc. So, this isn't something that's the preserve now of the large groups or online only retailers. But as I say, combining that with the ability to deal with customers on a personal level, I've got to say, it's been really interesting for me the last few months, actually.
Yeah, good. And I mean, what's next, dare I say, as we sort of start to wrap up this 2023 conversation? I'd seen you mixed with the Marshall job and other opportunities that were coming up. What can you tell me about the future for you?
Well, first of all, on that one, so rumours are rumours, aren't they? I mean, I suppose I should be quite flattered. Although I've got to say, when I keep getting complaints into my LinkedIn inbox from Marshall customers, it gets a bit frustrating, actually, to be fair. But
just preempting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as I said earlier on, I'm only recently free of restrictions, and I think, as they say on LinkedIn, they put a little thing saying available for work.
Okay.
So, is it likely that I disappear and retire or go into another industry? Probably not. Would I like to come back into the sector in another large job? Well, I would if it was the right company and it was the right culture fit. I don't need to. Would I like to? Probably I would. Failing that, I'll do something myself.
Excellent. Great stuff. And big task for you this year, Darren. What we're going to see happening at your business throughout 2023?
It's busy times, definitely. There's a lot to do in a short space of time. As always, that seems to be the sector that we're in for the last few years. For me, it's about bringing the group together as one family under the RJTK umbrella, and implementing some cost savings here and there where we can, looking at systems we use, pulling them together again as one business, and make sure that we have that continuity across the business so that we can run more efficiently. And obviously, as we all like to do, is increase our profitability. Apart from that, it's just going back to basics. Unfortunately, in certain areas of our business, I think we have slightly lost that, and it has been because of COVID, and then the used car wave that hit us. You know, you could almost buy a car and sell it within seconds. Times are changing. We need to get back to delivering the basics and a great customer service. That's not just external, that's internal as well. So I'm looking at enhancing the perks and the rewards that we give our staff. I've already done an internal video out to the whole group explaining a few things that are coming in Q1. So I want that to continue. I want to stabilise the team. Obviously, recruiting staff is difficult in this marketplace. We don't want to lose people. We want to keep the family together and just build a stronger group, really. That's where we are.
Absolutely. All areas that RSM will be advising
Absolutely.
on. You'll be trying to hook Darren to one side outside.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you expecting? An extremely busy business?
We're always busy.
Yeah.
But I guess helping clients to prepare and prosper, whether that's through change or challenges that have come through 23. It's going to be a tough year. There's always something that's a challenge, but I think this is going to be particularly battening down the hatches and will help businesses to find the opportunity and prosper from that.
Yeah, let's hope there is plenty of opportunity for all of us, Tim?
Absolutely. Motor retailers are very resilient. They've had plenty of tough years before and ridden out the storm, haven't they? So, and then they've had the good years and celebrated them. So I'm sure it will be business as usual for many business leaders in our sector.
Great stuff. Thanks all three of you for joining us. It's been a great discussion.
Fantastic.
And
Thank you.
We'll be live soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.